performance? It all starts with the tools at your fingertips. CMI creates workplaces full of inspiring leaders. With its on-demand resources, network of mentors, and industry-leading accreditations. Search CMI Confidence today.
This session is recorded and will be available on the CMI website and YouTube channel. Join the conversation by using the live chat box for your questions and comments. We'll answer as many as we can during the Q&A.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the May edition of the Chartered Management Consultant Masterclass, or as we like to say, CHMC for short. My name's Emma Jones. I'm the head of CHMC here at CMI, and the objective of today is to give you some insights into the assessment process, not just from myself, but from those that have been through the process themselves. An opportunity for you to ask questions of those individuals. Please feel free to add your questions to the chat, and we will get around to answering as many of them as we can at the end of the interviews. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our guest speakers today. I have great pleasure in introducing Mark Elliott, who is joining us from Morehouse Consulting. Good afternoon, Mark.
Good afternoon, Emma.
We are also joined by Niharika Singh from MHP. Good afternoon, Niharika.
Afternoon.
And we're joined by Sheraz Kott from HSBC. Hello, Sheraz.
Hi.
Welcome, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us and agreeing to share your insights and experience of the Chartered Management Consultant assessment process, warts and all. Let's start with brief introductions from you. Mark, would you like to go first?
Sure. I'm a client director at a management consulting firm called Morehouse Consulting. And I have a specialism in transport, so I look after all our clients and client work in the transport sector.
Thank you, Mark. Niharika.
Yes, pleasure to be here firstly, and thank you for having me. So a little bit about myself. I probably will take a little more time than Mark, but here goes. So my name is Niharika Singh. I'm a manager with MHP, a Porsche company. It is a subsidiary of Porsche, and our focus is automotive consulting, although now we are branching into aerospace and defense, so exciting times ahead. I've been in consulting for, I'd like to say, a little over 12 years almost now, well over a decade. I started my career with Capgemini in Paris in tech consulting, worked there for a bit. That was my first stint at consulting, the world of consulting. And then I wanted to move also and try different areas. So I moved to industry for a while, to Dassault Systèmes, also in Paris. But very soon realized that my love for consulting was calling me back. So I joined PwC in the Netherlands, and I worked there for a couple of years in Amsterdam. And for the past 2 years, I've been with MHP here in the UK. So I've moved countries, not continents, but yes, when I moved from India, but I've moved, this is my third country now, and I'm still in consulting, so I love it so far.
Great advocate for consulting. Thank you, Niharika. And Shreyas.
So thanks, Emma. Glad to be here. Just to kind of introduce myself, I am engineer by hobby and engineer by profession, but then pursued my MBA and started working in consulting post my MBA, and it's been nearly 10 years now that I've been part of the consulting industry and never felt like leaving it because it's a great sector to be in. I've been part of big 4 companies here on, and in my I just wanted to move industry. So I've been part of automotive industry. I've been part of industrial as well. And now I'm part of the financial services industry. So being part of the consulting strategy operations team, but just trying to gain experience across different industries. And that's where I'm currently at with financial services within HSBC as part of the internal consulting team here.
Okay, so a really broad spectrum of experience here in lots of different sectors, lots of industries, and some similarities, which is fascinating, but all management consultants and all chartered. So congratulations on your chartership. I believe Mark and Niharika, you are recently chartered in April.
Yes,
It's very fresh.
Very fresh.
Very fresh. Shreyas, you passed in January.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, 3 months back.
Okay, great. So we're here to talk about that experience. So I'm going to kick you off with a few questions. And it's really around, I'm always asked, how do you prepare? How do you prepare for your assessment in any way? And you might have had other people around you that have gone through it. You might have had nobody. You might have been the first. I mean, what steps did you take? So, Mark, kick us off.
I did a couple of things. I spoke to colleagues. So I'm fortunate that our company's got 300 consultants. So we've been going through this process of certification with every consultant. And it's important to us that we can show this level of commitment to the industry, but also increasing number of our clients are asking, are our consultants certified? So we've been on this journey for a year or so. So the first thing I did was speak to some of my colleagues and just understand the process they went through. I took a look at some of their submissions, those who were willing to share, and that gave me a few clues and a few bits of inspiration. And I guess the way that the process is structured, so the competency framework documentation that you share is extremely useful, because it just gives you the inspiration and the thought on areas to look at, and areas I'd need to spend a bit more time thinking about versus those that I could answer quite easily.
Okay, so useful insights. How does that compare with your experience, Shreyas?
So for me, I think so. What Mark mentioned, I was fortunate enough that I had a lot of CSMC kind of network here within my company, and I was able to kind of take their assistance. But what I did differently was, for me, I had to kind of give it a try first. So I did a kind of a sample submission, and then took it to my sponsor as well as my mentors here within the company, kind of ask them to kind of have a look through it, and then kind of give suggestions as to how I can improve my suggestion, or where I might have gone wrong, and how well I can do, or how can I improve my submission as such. So that's how I went ahead with it.
Okay, some good tips then, hopefully gathered from your colleagues.
Yes.
And some good insights. Hopefully you didn't go too wrong the first time. Well, useful hints and tips. So Mark, you started by asking for advice. Shreyas, you put pen to paper and then got some feedback. Now, Harika, your experience?
Quite similar, actually. I think the preparation journey is more or less similar for everyone. Also, luckily for me, our CEO kind of paved the way, Guy Williamson. He was the first one to get the chartership within our company. And I was fortunate enough to have a look at his written submission, get a little bit of sort of a reference point guidelines. But I think what Mark said, familiarizing yourself with the competency framework is really important. Gathering evidence that maps to that competency framework, because in this past decade or so, we've gone through a lot of different experiences, different clients, but really kind of isolating that bits of experience that maps to that competency framework, putting it in the right way, putting it across in the right way, so that it comes across to the assessor, to the person reading it in a clear way. And I think the last thing was also going back to the sponsor, having a sort of not like a mock interview, but just a mock submission, practicing. So yeah, I think all of these little bits and pieces that we did to prepare, or I did to prepare.
Okay. So you started with the framework, or you started with the experience? Where did you start?
Started with looking at the written submission that was already submitted, started that as a reference point, then went to the framework, and then started gathering my evidences, etc., based on that framework, and then mapping them together, and then having them sort of proofread or verified, or just having them read by someone else in the team.
Okay. And I guess that paves similar to you, Shreyas, where you've done the draft, and then you're getting some advice and guidance from others in the organization. What was I guess let's start, anybody actually jump in. What was the most tricky thing, the most challenging thing about the written submission?
I found the questions around ethics and the section on ethics caused me to think a little bit more. A few more brain cycles went into that one than the kind of operational management consulting delivery experience, simply because it's a very broad topic area, and the framework mixes your corporate responsibility experience with ethical behavior, with the behavior of your company's ethics, as well as the ethical behavior and the ethics required for your clients' environment you're working. So there's a broad area to address on one topic. So if there was any I had to just pause for thought and just try and unpick and then replay and try and get to what I think the assessment is looking for, that area required me to think a bit more.
Interesting point, actually, because it's the first competency in the framework, the first one on the list. Not necessarily the first one in the submission template, but it's the first one in the competency framework you come to. Mm-hmm. And once you start reading through the rest of the competencies, you realize that actually it threads all the way through. Mm-hmm. Mark said, you're making links to everything you do and the ethical stance that you're taking. Was that similar for either of Niharika or Shreyas? What was your experience?
I think for me, the ethics part was okay, wasn't that challenging. But for me, what was really challenging in the written submission was managing sort of brevity with depth, where you want to showcase your skills, because this isn't like a conversation. I think in a conversation, you can sort of express and speak a lot more. But in a written submission, you want to be able to kind of showcase everything that you've done, the impact that you've caused, the skills, but then avoid sort of overwhelming the assessors with unnecessary information and side information or get sidetracked. So I think really, you're given sort of like maybe 500 words to convey this message, and you want to land the message. So yeah, I think for me, managing brevity with depth, I would say, was probably the most challenging part.
Okay.
I would second Niharika's statement there, and yes, brevity was important. But in addition to that, what was actually more challenging and as well as rewarding for me was the entire process of gathering evidence, because the day I started looking into the entire competency framework and then started to just reflect back on what I did and what kind of engagements I had completed, the experiences that I had through this, and then when I went through the questions within the competency framework and then started thinking about gathering those evidences, it was a long process. So for me, that I took time in that entire process of reflection, but that was rewarding as well for me there.
I have to agree with that as well, Shreyas, because I remember I had to probably reopen my CV again to just go back to what I did in my initial years. And yeah, it was, and actually it's probably a good suggestion for future, is when you're doing your engagements, just make a little note of the things that you keep on doing, because sometimes when you have to come back to it, it's like, oh my gosh.
I've heard that a lot, actually. It's quite a cathartic exercise, looking back over how did I get here? What have I done? looking back over the many years of engagements, and you've all cited quite a lot of experience between you, how did you choose, Mark, how did you choose which engagements to present in your written submission?
Well, I'm quite fortunate, I guess. I gave up trying to count. I think over 100 engagements with clients over 35 years means I've got a lot to dip into. My CV doesn't go back that far, though. So I had to dig up some old CVs. So how did I pick? You know what? I picked the engagements which when I think back to that work, gave me the most satisfaction and I was the most proud of. So some of them weren't necessarily large or high financial value engagements, but I felt that I made a huge contribution to those. They either because I sold them or I led them or I was asked to play a key role on those projects. But it was more of an emotional choice than a logical choice, I guess, in the experience I picked.
Okay, and Enrica, Sheraz, how did you choose? Because you've got so much experience, and you said a really brief word count to fit it into, and you want to shine. How did you decide?
I have to admit it was quite challenging. Please, Shreyas, go ahead.
Yeah, please.
It was quite challenging, I have to admit. Don't have 100 engagements as Mark, but even so, it was quite challenging. Yes, I think the choice was where for me it was where did I make the most impact? Which project was it for me? That also maps to the competency framework, but where I felt personally satisfied, where I made the most impact. And I think the choice was, and similar to Mark, they weren't necessarily the biggest ones, but they were the ones where my contribution was probably the most.
Excellent. Sheraz?
Sorry, I think also if you pick the engagements that you're most proud of, it's a lot easier to talk about them at the interview.
True.
Whereas if you pick something that you did 10 years ago and you have to keep reminding yourself what you did, that's not going to come across as well when you're interviewed. So there was a method behind my madness, I guess. Sorry, Sheraz.
Yeah, that's true, Mark. And I second that. But one thing which I kind of did in that additionally while reflecting was to kind of map out whatever evidences I have. It might be across different engagements, across the competencies, and just kind of type it all down and kind of make it like a Excel framework as such, or a dashboard across there, and then actually choose what's the most appropriate and apt one for that particular competency, and also within that try to ensure that I have covered a lot of my engagement so that the depth of the skill sets were also visible more or less, and the applicability of the competency framework was also ensured during my submission. So that's the only thing which I did. And yes, there were some engagements which were not covered as such, but for me it was more of ensuring that I am true to the competency framework in the application, and also what's the most apt example that I can give through the evidences. That was my focus to kind of engage. So it might not be a very big engagement, it might be the smallest engagement I might have done, but if it was very apt for that competency, that was my focus point, is to ensure that evidence is gathered and captured in the application.
Some really good points brought out there. It's not about size. It's not about the scale of the engagement. You're looking to evidence the breadth of the competency framework. And you would probably have identified a number of engagements that covered multiple competencies, which is a really good piece of evidence. Or you might have had some really small niche engagements that you're super proud of and can talk about that were very bespoke and just really demonstrated one competence. It's a balance. But obviously the objective is to demonstrate you covered all of the competencies. Now, Mark, you highlighted you were challenged with the ethical piece about how do I evidence that I've demonstrated these competencies. Shreyas, Nirihirika, any of the competencies that you found particularly difficult to evidence?
Mhm. I'll have to think about it because it's been a while, but I think maybe the client operating environments, because it's so broad and there are so many smaller aspects within it. Like there's an industry sector specialism, whether you talk about your stakeholder relationship development or your operational delivery or your strategic analysis insights, or you focus on clients and market, and to kind of touch upon all of these points with an example, with a concrete example. I think it was a bit challenging, but also I think an exercise like that gives you a lot of makes you reflect a lot of introspection about how you kind of come across, and also I think improves you because you kind of learn, you kind of wire your brain to kind of speak differently or learn how to land a message even to the clients that you speak. I felt that after this exercise, when I was talking to the clients, I was thinking also in a very, very structured way, in a way. But so yeah, I think that was probably the most challenging one for me to really come across in a very structured way with the right example, with where I'm touching all of these points. Ethical was okay because I'm also the DEI lead for the company, and I've been doing a lot of DEI initiatives, so that I think came quite naturally. So I was able to articulate and put those all of the efforts that I've done over the years quite easily. So yeah, I think for me, probably these two.
So it was the broadness of that particular competence and being able to cover all of the elements within that client operating environment that was quite tricky. Shreyas, your thoughts?
So for me, the personal and professional development portion was a little bit tricky because if I look at it, every year we do the goals assessment, etc., within the organization, but it's more focused on the roles on this there. But from a personal point of view, the skill sets which I need to develop and I really want to kind of hone going forward is what I wanted to kind of think about a lot, and that actually was a little difficult for me to kind of answer as to how I'm going to tackle it, how am I going to create a formal structure around it so that I will be able to assess my yearly performance against those professional targets that I have taken going forward. So that was a little tricky for me, and actually took a little bit of kind of discussion along with my sponsor for it, and a kind of a feedback from him as well.
Okay, so that work's ongoing because you passed in January, so you've achieved all those objectives now, right? You're moving on to the next. Okay, so you've all mentioned your specialisms. Did you need to, I mean, how did your specialism affect your application? Did you have to go into any depth of your specialism? Did it stop you from really demonstrating the breadth of the competencies? Mark, you transport.
Not really. I mean, the framework digs into what I would classify as sort of systemic core management consulting traits and attributes. Unless you're in some bizarre specialism, I can't see why all of them wouldn't apply to any industry sector or any discipline, any horizontal. You might be a supply chain expert or something. It's the process seems to focus more on your relationship with your clients and the impact and value you're bringing in the business, and your behavior, your style, and your techniques for being a management consultant. So I'm not sure. The specialism just helps, I guess, in the examples, so I can bring it to life. But I can only talk about where I work, can't I? I can't make it up. So the specialism area has to feature because that's where I work.
Exactly. So we've got transport, we've got engineering, moving into tech, we've got automotive. So much experience in so many niche, potentially, industries, but it didn't impact your application as a management consultant because those competencies go across the board.
Yes, I Absolutely, 100% agree with Mark. I think the specialism kind of helps you to have more in-depth conversations perhaps with the clients. When you are talking to them, you understand the value chain, for example, for automotive, or I understand what their R&D process is. So it helps me to have a more detailed and a better conversation with the clients. But basic management consulting knowledge, that, whether it is problem solving or like having a holistic approach, continuous learning, cross-functional knowledge, those are kind of basic management consulting skills that kind of run across the competency framework and across the board. And then you have specific examples to give based on your industry sector.
Great. Okay.
I guess
Let's
Mark
do-
and Erica have covered most of the things, so nothing for me to add here.
Nothing more to add. You've got the specialisms, done it. Professional discussion, Shiraz. You've submitted your application. You've got the email that says, let's schedule your professional discussion. How did you go about getting ready for that?
So for me, I while I was submitting the application, I had ensured that the evidences which I give, I had detailed it out for myself so that I could use it in the part of professional discussion. So for me, it was more or less kind of going through the application again and ensuring that the evidences which I have mapped, how I'm going to present it, and kind of explain it during the professional discussion. So for me, it was just going through the application, ensuring that the competency framework is mapped, and trying to ensure that the evidences which I've gathered, I kind of ensure it applies to the same application, the competency framework which is there, and be able to explain it effectively to the during the discussion, basically.
And that's building on what Mark was saying, wasn't it? About choosing examples in your submission that you can talk about. You can actually, explain your role, you're enthused about it. But Mark, did you touch on any other engagements during your professional discussion that weren't in your submission?
I can't remember. Probably.
Probably.
but I couldn't prepare for them because I didn't know whether they'd be covered.
Okay.
So it might be helpful to have your CV, as Nirika said, to your right hand side to remind you if your memory is as bad as mine. But
Okay.
no, I didn't find. Actually, the interview didn't grill me on evidence. I think the interviewer is sufficiently skilled to get the answers that they want without demanding you to evidence each point. So no, I didn't struggle too much on trying to dig up old examples or run out of examples. No.
Okay. So
in fact, I would comment that the interviewer did a very good job of pretty much sticking to the content I put in the submission. So she referred to, I see you said this, I see, tell me a bit more about this, let's elaborate on this. So she stuck to the script in a way, and didn't put me under any pressure to bring more, not that I recall anyway. So that was quite helpful.
Okay. Niharika, during your professional discussion, what did you find most difficult?
So firstly, the interviewer, as Mark said, was very skilled. It didn't feel like an interview, like a job interview or like an interview session, but in its true sense, it felt like a discussion. They wanted to know, and they wanted to basically have a little bit more detailed analysis of the examples that you have submitted. And perhaps two things that were a little bit challenging for me was work in like a consulting environment, you're often working on engagements with teams. It is a team effort, it's a teamwork. When you deliver successfully a completed project, it is a teamwork. But in this instance, you had to talk really about yourself and the impact that you have made individually. And I think for me to isolate that from the overall delivery of the project and say that I have made impact, I have done this, it was a bit hard to kind of get into that role and to say it. What I did to kind of because even when I was doing like sort of seeking feedback and trying to do these mock sessions to kind of prepare, and I had a tendency of saying we a lot, and I was corrected that I need to say more I. What I did was sort of thought a little bit backwards, so a little bit of reverse engineering here. And I thought, what would not have happened or what would not have been successfully delivered in the project if I wasn't part of it? If I wasn't there, for example, maybe they wouldn't have a whole risk management process set up because I led that, I did it. So yeah, I think I had to kind of reverse engineer, but it did really help me. And the second thing was a lot of times, you deliver something and you're like, my work's done and it's great. But to actually think about quantifiably what is the impact of my effort, did that reduce the efficiency of this by this percentage, or how much, like in terms of like numeric values or like quantitative values, what is the impact? Quantify it. I think that really made me think a lot, but it was a good exercise.
Okay, so I and measurable impact are two really good takeaways from that. Mark, anything to add to that?
Yes, I can't add to that. That's excellent guidance. And I struggle with this even with our proposals for new client work. If you think about it, it's you've got to be careful about what you're representing and just listen and think about what the end in this case the end client is looking for in terms of when they're interviewing you for a role or looking at CVs. My only feedback on the interview process is just to plan out where you're going to be during the interview. So my mistake was to pick a day that my clients then decided, having chosen a date, that they wanted me to be on site. So attempting to do the interview from my car didn't work. So we agreed to reschedule. So thank you to the interviewer who was very kind in suggesting that we do it.
That was you.
That was me. Oh, the word got around the office, did it? That someone tried to do the interview from the car.
Some really good points there, though. You are expected to try and manage your time and be in a quiet space where you can actually give your best.
Yes.
But I think another good point there is treating it like a client engagement. You've been asked, you've been requested for information. It's like responding to an RFP. You need to respond to it. You need to answer all those questions, cover the scope, and treat that assessor as your client, but in a nice way, having a professional discussion rather than a full-on question debate interview. Shreyas, anything to add about the professional discussion actually in the discussion itself with your interviewer?
So there were instances for me where I was asked evidences from what was not mentioned within the submission which I had completed. So for me, that was something which I had to kind of come up on the spot and kind of help answer what the interview kind of asked. But like I said, like what was mentioned, it never felt like an interview as such. It was more of a discussion. So it was more of them trying to understand the applicability to the competency framework, and me trying to provide that information, like you said, just providing all the info which is there.
Okay, great to hear. Okay, if we were to ask each of you to give your top tips to those listening on, I guess, what you wish you would have known before you started the process, what would you advise somebody? So you've got other people. All three of you have got other people in your organization going through this process. What would be your top tips?
So I'd like to go first here. For me, it's that don't overthink it. Before starting the process and before completing the submission, I kind of thought about it a lot as to how do I approach it, how do I do it. It's just a matter of kind of giving that time, giving that effort, and kind of start to the process. And then once you kind of get into it, you have those questions, and you will have support within the network to help you out. And it's just about starting that process and not overthinking about it as to how am I do I have enough evidences to be part of, like, will I be able to submit the application? Will I have enough evidences or not? So we do tend to think in that particular manner, and I especially did, and it was just a matter of fact that once I sat down and kind of gathered those evidences and thought through the entire journey that I had and having right now, so the experience that I had previously, I got that confidence about how will I submit it. So it's just about just start investing that time with the application, with the competency framework and the application, and you will surely should get through it.
Okay, so get started. Stop procrastinating and get started. Okay, I like that. Mark or Niharika, top tips?
Mark, you want to go first?
I've picked 4. Although I think Shira has probably touched on them. One is just give yourself some time. So unlike my sons who leave their homework until the last 5 minutes and possibly the morning that they're due to submit it, don't do that. Give yourself a good few weeks, and then you can do it in sections as well. So bite off little chunks. Find yourself a mentor. So I found a couple of mentors who'd either gone through it, or in fact, one of them hadn't even gone through it. They were quite intrigued by the whole process, but I trusted their opinions, like phone a friend on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. Don't use ChatGPT.
Oh, no.
Believe me, people are using this too much, so don't use it, or use it just to be amused as to how it churns up your answers. And pick, as we said earlier, pick examples that mean something to you, because I think, especially during the interview that follows, if these are engagements that you remember fondly, you'll just talk so passionately about them that you'll tick, 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 tick. It'll be clear to the interviewer that you were very well engaged in those projects, and you'll remember the finer details as well.
Yeah, really good points. Really good points. Thank you, Mark. Niharika, what have you come up with?
I also have a couple of points. First, I think is common to both Shreyas and Mark is start early, gather feedback, start early, give yourself a few weeks of time instead of cramming everything into like last minute, because yes, it helps when you can sort of do maybe 2 questions a day, then think back and look at your CV, collect evidence, and then do a couple later. It also makes your application a little bit more cohesive and comprehensive. So definitely start early. What helped us in our organization was, so as I said, our CEO guy did his chartership first. And then we were sort of a group of, I think, 4 or 5 people that were going in next. And we formed sort of this peer support, like a cohort. And we had calls scheduled probably weekly or bi-weekly, or like once in every 2-3 weeks, which kind of helped us, also motivated each other. Oh, where are you in your application? Have you submitted? So also pushed us, because sometimes I think you can get a bit complacent and be like, I'll do it. But when you know your colleague is doing it, it kind of motivates and it pushes you. So I think if there are a couple of people doing it together, forming that support group really helps. The third advice which I would like to give for people going in the future is be honest and reflective. I don't think you necessarily only have to talk about your successes. I think it's important to talk about your challenges, how you overcame them, what you learned, because that's a huge part of sort of your journey as a management consultant. It's also kind of unnatural when if you come across and say, I was just successful in everything that I've done in the past 12 years. I've never had any failures, never had any challenges, no difficult stakeholders. I was just perfect. So I think be honest and reflective. It's really important. And lastly is probably understand and gauge the assessor's perspective. Just understand what they're looking for instead of trying to over-engineer or giving too much of unnecessary information. So it's just sort of like you said, like think of it as a client engagement. So think of it like a client sitting in front of you, asking you for information. And how would you approach that? Would you just say a lot of rubbish around it, or would you really stick maybe to the point with a little bit of extra information? So those would be my top tips.
There's some excellent points there from everyone. I reinforce that point that you've made there, Niharika, about your learning. So, part of your evolution as a management consultant, and the reason you are chartered, is because you are continually developing, applying what you've learned. And it's not all rosy, is it? Some things do go wrong, and when they go wrong, we put them right, and we understand what we've learned from them. And that's really powerful evidence, really powerful. So some great stuff there. Let's move to the questions. We have had a couple of questions pre-submitted. First question we've got here is from Jamal. Jamal asks, what are the key success factors of being a management consultant? Gosh, I'm going to open that up to you guys. What do you think are the key success factors?
Listening and brevity.
Okay, listening and brevity. Hence the word count in the submissions. Reinforce that.
And my 2-word answer.
2-word answer. Yeah, very good. Niharika.
Communication skills is extremely important. I think as a management consultant, that's probably one of your top skills to have, because you will be doing that with the clients internally, across the board, cross-functionally. The amount of communication, it can very soon turn into a Chinese whisper if you're not communicating the right things from one team to another. So I think communication skills are an absolute must. The maybe problem-solving abilities. You should think that when you approach an engagement, at the end of the day, you're trying to solve a problem. So I think what's important is that as a management consultant, you must be sort of adept at structuring issues, generating sort of hypotheses, and coming up with innovative solutions to advise the client. So problem solving, communication skills, and I think maybe a bit of industry knowledge of where you're working. So a little bit of like emerging trends and things and problems faced by the client, or just understanding the value chain of the industry that you're a part of.
Thank you, Niharika. Anything to add to that, Shiraz?
I would just like to add into that industry knowledge for surely one. Wherever you're working, having the grasp of what the trends are, how the industry is doing is surely there. But in addition to that, a management consultant needs to have, I would say, be adaptive to different situation and to find innovative solutions out of that different situations. Because whenever you're tackling a client, not all clients are same, not all situations are same, and each solution a client will require you to kind of question yourself as to how best should I tackle this particular situation. And the more adaptive you are to resolving a particular situation with different tactics or different ways, with using different skill sets, that actually will help you make a better management consultant.
Okay, some great advice there. I hope that's answered your question, Jamal. Our second pre-submitted question is from Stephen. When consulting in a new field, or even an adjacent field, how do you overcome the imposter syndrome of telling subject matter experts how to improve their processes? Okay, so we talked about specialisms, didn't we? So you're now working in an environment that you're not the SME, you're not the subject matter expert. So how do you overcome imposter syndrome?
I've applied a couple of techniques. One is, let's pick an example. If you ask me to be a brain surgeon or talk about brain surgery, there are still going to be analogies with other areas where I have some knowledge. There's going to be some analogies in process, in preparation, in stakeholders, in people's behavior. There's going to be some similarities. So you can have a think about where, and you said an adjacent field. So that's, in your question, there are going to be some similarities despite it being maybe a different specialist area. The other is to be honest. I've told as many clients, I don't understand or I don't know, so tell me more. And if you can build a bond with a client by actually getting them to talk about their world, and and they'll be passionate about it and go into the detail. You learn very quickly. Get them to educate you. Be honest about what you don't know, and that sometimes puts a bit of humanity into the relationship you build with your clients as well.
Okay, thanks, Mark. That's reinforcing a lot of what Raji was saying about communication, asking questions, getting to know your client, and problem solving.
Yes.
Problem solving,
Yes.
relevant of the technical area. It's a skill.
Yes, it is. And I think when you're consulting in sort of a new or adjacent field, it sort of requires a combination of effective communication, humility, self-confidence, and preparation. So it is important to approach, as Mark said, you go and you develop this bond with the person. You go with a little bit of humility, not with this attitude of I am better than you or I know it all, but acknowledge that you bring a unique perspective. You have other areas of expertise, and you're coming with to gather their expertise to gain knowledge from them, and it's sort of like a give and take, and you work together as a team. So you build that bond and relationship rather than approaching it in a very, authoritative way. I would say approach it with a little bit of humility, and that I think that works. That works everywhere.
Okay. So you're saying you don't have all the answers?
Yes. And nobody does, I think.
Okay. Really good. Have any of you ever experienced imposter syndrome?
Every day.
Plenty of times.
So think about it. We're in this role. I love this job because I learn something every day. And I'm taken into situations with clients who are clearly struggling with something, otherwise they wouldn't be calling us. Mm-hmm. And so they are also admitting that they're in need of help. Yeah. And the thing they're struggling with is not going to be easy. So the chances of you walking in and having all the answers. So I think there's a little bit of that aspect appears every day, I would have said.
Yeah. I mean, fear of failure is something that is very often cited for people starting this journey for Chartered Management Consultant Award. And it's sometimes cited as the thing that's stopping them getting started. Shera, she said, just get on, stop procrastinating, let's just get pen to paper. But fear of failure can be a big issue for people starting this process. How do you overcome that?
I think it helps when you sort of know the end goal of what you're working towards. I think fear of failure is there in everyone, but with a little bit of maybe mentorship, support from your mentors or your peers, and knowing that you're working towards something, and at the end of the day, the satisfaction when you deliver a project successfully, when the client has passed its audit without any non-conformities and you've been part of it, or just delivering that and having that satisfaction is a lot more. So it is tough, it is challenging, but I think that's sort of like part of the job. It wouldn't be a management consulting, if it was so easy. Everyone would be. So there is fear, but I think the rewards are a lot more at the end.
One of my old mentors used to say to me, and it's stuck with me for years. He says, I deliberately do something every day that makes me feel uncomfortable. And it's almost like training yourself to be able to deal with, and if it's fear of failure, that's one level of discomfort, but there could be other aspects that are holding you back. So he would face the problem straight on by deliberately doing something. The classic one is cold calling new clients. We all do it. We all have to do it. And that it's a bit like stage fright, isn't it? That first initial contact with somebody you've never met, but you're trying to sell or promote yourself. And that creates a bit of fear. So he would deliberately speak to somebody new as one of his techniques for being uncomfortable every day, which that stuck with me. I don't think he really did it every day, but you get the point.
I think you just have to take the plunge. I don't think there is any sort of work around it. You have to face it head on. It's just there are ways that can make it easier for you. You can sort of seek help. Somebody can encourage you, etc. But at the end of the day, you have to do it.
Yeah, you just have to accept that failure is part of the process, and you're going to learn from it, because it's never going to happen that whatever approach you take will always be successful. So over a period of time, you're going to fail. You just have to accept it that you're going to fail. But the better approach, I would say, is to ensure that you learn from it and not make the same mistakes again, but then ensure that you're trying your best, or I would say preparing for whatever situation comes in and trying to give all the best you can for any situation.
No plan survives first contact, remember?
Yeah. And life is what happens when you're doing something else. Yes. So some really great, insightful stuff there. Get started, don't procrastinate. If you go wrong, there's a learning experience. And a lot of the engagements that really shape you as a management consultant are the ones that maybe didn't go as according to plan, as expected, and you learn more from. And those are great examples that you can present. As long as, Shreya, as you said, you don't keep making the same mistakes, and you can demonstrate you've learned from them, but you've had that impact. Okay, some great insights there. Is there anything else you would like to leave as a final note for our audience on the assessment process and key tips?
So for the assessment process, like I mentioned, and it was kind of discussed in detail, if you have people around you, take their help wherever you can, be it as a group or a cohort to work with, or a mentor, or even a sponsor, whichever way you can. You have enough material to support you. You have enough support from the CMI team here to help you resolve your queries. It's just a matter of fact that you have to be true to yourself and go through the process, because getting the chartership means that you have to go through the process, understand what it really means, and you have to spend that time.
Yeah, absolutely agree with you. And I think, like I said, for people that are preparing or planning to go for it, again, this is sort of something like the fear of failure, or whatever it is. I would say just go for it, just do it. And at the end of the day, what's the worst that can happen? You don't know. But if you do get the chartership, and if you go through this journey, it's a great learning experience that you can pass on to maybe your direct reportees or your team. And secondly, it's sort of, in a way, validation of the work that you've done. It takes time and it's a process, but when you get that chartership and you have that, against your name that you can display on LinkedIn, or you have that badge, it feels very, it feels good. It feels validated. It feels like, yes, in a way, sort of all that imposter syndrome, it feels like, no, actually, I do know the stuff that I've been working on. I have delivered and I am good enough. So I would say it's very validating at the end of it, and keep the end goal in mind, go for it and seek support. And I think there are a lot of people to support you in the journey.
Thank you, Nireka. Okay. Well, it just leaves me to say thank you very much for your insights and for joining us today. Congratulations again to achieving your chartership. And I hope we have managed to answer the audience's questions. Please, if anybody has any questions to submit after the event, please do. You can contact the CHMC team at chmc@managers.org.uk. That's hard for me to remember. But thank you for your insights, team. It was wonderful to meet you all and listen to you. And I hope that you enjoyed the session. It wasn't too painful. But thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having us here. I really enjoyed the session. And yes, if anyone has any questions post this event as well, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn as well. Thank you so much.
Don't forget, as a CMI member, you can find the latest management and leadership insights at managers.org.uk. If you're not yet a member, join our community to discover CMI Confidence with on-demand resources, our network of mentors, and industry-leading accreditations.